Welcome to the NBA Slate Breakdown. I'm Jason Gilbo. With me is Brent Hyden, taking a look at tonight's four-game Monday slate. Definitely not an enticing slate to kick off the week. I think we'll have to wait for tomorrow for some excitement.
Yeah, you and I were talking before we started recording, and you were like, "Are there any games you're really off of?" And I was like, "All of them." Yeah, it's not too terribly appealing as far as the slate goes. A lot of injuries that kind of make these games a little bit risky as far as stacking and attacking, and some bad teams on here as well.
Yeah, we have Memphis. We have a couple double-digit spreads. We got Miami, who's hurt with injuries tonight. You were questionable for the pod. You got allergies, as you were telling. So it's just not a good Monday for you here.
Yeah, freaking pollen season is kicking my butt.
It's always worse when you wake up and you just see like a sea of yellow like on screens and cars. It's just it's the worst.
Yeah, it's the worst time of year for me, but hopefully I'll be able to power through it and get through the podcast.
Yeah. After you look at the pollen, you get to come in and look at this four-game slate, which is just. But Spurs Houston here first. Houston favored by 12.5, 210 over under. Usually not an over under that we're kind of used to seeing with Houston teams in games, but that's just because the Spurs are here and we get Harden back tonight. He rested yesterday, but I kind of still expect them to play with a little bit of caution, I think, with Harden.
Yeah, it's possible, but they haven't necessarily shown any caution with him outside of resting him last game. I think there's been a couple of times where he's been questionable with knee soreness and things like that, and he's still come out and played like 38 minutes. So Mike D'Antoni doesn't really care that much, apparently, but I think the caution that we need to exercise with this game is the fact that with the Spurs being without LaMarcus Aldridge, without Kawhi Leonard, there's a decent chance they get run off the floor tonight because they have looked really, really, really bad on the road recently.
Yeah, this is not really a game that I'm too fond of, and on the Spurs side, like you said, I mean Aldridge going to be out tonight. When you look at the starting five and what's potentially going to be, you're going to see a lot of Rudy Gay and Bertans, and I wouldn't even be surprised if like Pau Gasol only plays 20 minutes and we get like Joffrey Laverne in there.
Yeah, that's what I'm a little bit worried about. I would expect the starting lineup for the Spurs to be Murray, Mills, Anderson, Bertans, and then Pau Gasol. Obviously, if the Spurs are able to keep this game close and Pau Gasol is able to play normal minutes, you would expect him to be able to put up a solid game here against a Rockets team that has struggled against centers. Obviously, we know Pau Gasol generally puts up decent games whenever Aldridge is off the floor. He's averaging 1.2 fantasy points per minute, so he is someone that you can attack. I think he'll be a popular target in cash games, so you probably just want to roll with a chalk there. You mentioned Rudy Gay. I think he's the guy that I have a lot of interest in from a tournament perspective. Obviously, we don't expect him to play a bunch of minutes. You're probably looking about 24, 26 minutes out of him. But with Aldridge and Leonard and Ginobili off the floor this season in about 170 minutes, he's averaging like 1.3 fantasy points per minute with a 31% usage rate. That's a pretty solid usage rate and some pretty solid production. Again, it's a tough matchup, and you don't expect him to play a ton of minutes, but there is some rebounding upside and obviously some scoring potential here. And I think this is a good spot to attack him because his price is way down across the industry.
Yeah, I mean, below 5K over on DraftKings. He's been above 20 fantasy points in four of the last five games. Obviously, the only game that was Memphis, but they were kind of at full capacity as far as the lineup goes. So, been a solid fantasy points per minute player. I definitely like Rudy Gay here. You kind of got to look at the slate and go, yeah, you got to throw out the blowouts here, unless you're kind of talking about the guys that you're paying up for, because maybe their ceilings are a little bit capped. But like you said, if you're expecting this game to stay close, I'm kind of expecting guys like Gasol, Gay, and maybe even Murray here have a decent game.
Yeah, I like to target Murray in games against teams that struggle protecting the rim, and obviously the Rockets a little below league average, and as far as rim protection, opponents are shooting about 65% at the rim against him this season. So you would think this is a spot that he could attack. Obviously, you do maybe have a few reservations about Chris Paul's defense. Houston has been better against point guards over the last 10. They ranked 10th in defensive efficiency against the position, but he's an interesting target. I would like to take advantage of Houston's weakness against spot-up shooters. that would mean, someone like Patty Mills could be a very interesting tournament option here. Again, Davis Bertans, who is spotting up on like 51% of his possessions this season, is someone that you can target as well. And Danny Green actually went off against his team the last time out, 22 points in their previous meeting. Hasn't been playing very well. He's obviously coming off the bench, and it's tough for some of these guys that have been perennial starters to adjust coming off the bench. But he's someone else that I think you could get some tournament exposure to here.
Yeah, I don't mind taking a shot. Like, it's a 4-game slate, and that's kind of the only slate that I will take shots on Danny Green. I kind of just, I mean, these guard situation has been a little bit tough to predict, like as far as minutes, but with Ginobili out, like that frees up a little bit here. Because I mean, outside of that, like, Green's only averaged 23 minutes over the last 5 games. We've seen Mills come in and average 29. Murray, still not really topping the 30-minute mark a lot. He's averaging 27 over the last 5. But I think on tonight's slate, like, I don't, there's not a ton of high upside guys outside of like 1 or 2 or 3 studs.
Yeah, exactly. If you're actually playing tonight, like you're gonna have to make some uncomfortable moves, especially in tournaments. In cash, it's a little bit easier because you can roll with some of the chalky options, but in tournaments, you're just gonna have to make some uncomfortable moves, and that means guys like Danny Green and some other guys that we're gonna talk about tonight.
You like taking a shot on like Tony Parker at all?
He's definitely interesting. Like the usage rate and the production without Manu and without LaMarcus Aldridge on the floor this season is high. It's 29% and 0.92 fantasy points per minute. I mean, again, it's one of those a guy that I would probably look at in tournaments. Although, like again, he's not playing a ton of minutes. Probably going to cap out like mid to low 20s. But he could definitely do some damage, especially at his price. What is he? 3,900 and 4,200 4K over on FanDuel. Again, probably someone that I would sprinkle in some tournaments.
Yeah, I mean, shooting pretty well, like you said. Like the minutes aren't there, but the usage is fairly solid. At his price, like I mean, you're kind of just hoping for that 25 fantasy point mark. Like I'm not asking for anything more.
Yeah, for sure. And I briefly touched on Davis Bertans. Like he's not going to play a bunch of minutes. Like I just like he caps out like most nights whenever one of these guys is out, like right around the mid 20s. I think he got 28 against Golden State, but he's a guy that you could definitely look at in cash. I don't see a huge ceiling out of him, but he's cash viable. And Joffrey Laverne, if you think Pau Gasol is going to play limited minutes or the Spurs get just completely blown out here, he's a guy that you could take a flyer on in tournaments as well.
Yep. Pretty soon we should be getting Kawhi back, and it will be a little bit better for the Spurs.
You would think.
I hope so. That should be it for your Spurs side. Moving over to Houston. Like I said, Harden's due back tonight. It was anticipated to sit out the first leg of a back-to-back. Ryan Anderson questionable. This is a team where I kind of see like they could blow out Spurs tonight, and it kind of hurts like the upside of like a Harden and Paul. But I don't really love taking shots at some of the other guys here either.
Yeah, I'm not terribly high on the Houston side of this game. Obviously, if you want to roll Harden out there, he's a guy that you feel pretty comfortable is going to get you, at least 50 fantasy points. I mean, over his last 10 games, he's only been below 50 once, and that was against the Clippers. So if you're especially on DraftKings at 10-7, if you're just kind of wanting to lock in that safe floor, you can definitely do that. Chris Paul is cheap. I mean, 7,700 is really cheap for Paul. Not a terrible matchup against the Spurs. Are 12th in defensive efficiency over the last 10 games. Obviously, it is, they do play slow, so that kind of hurts upside a little bit. But I don't mind taking a shot on Chris Paul in tournaments. Not someone that I'm looking at in cash games. And then the rest of these guys, like the Eric Gordons and things like that, I don't know that I'm going to chase those.
No, I mean, Eric Gordon was obviously in play yesterday without Harden. Like, I'm not really looking to go back there. I think Ryan Anderson's status is a little bit interesting as far as taking like the small forward options. Like on FanDuel, like Trevor Ariza is fine. I know he's coming off a dud game against Dallas, but minutes are still going to be there. Like, once again, not really a high ceiling. I know he put up a couple 30 fantasy point games, but I'm just not really intrigued. Like, I expect kind of the more 25 fantasy point mark out of Ariza tonight.
Yeah, Ariza's a guy you're just looking at for like basically minutes. Like he's been really cold from like beyond the arc, which has really, really hurt his upside recently. But like he's 4,700 on DraftKings. He's still pretty cheap over on FanDuel as well, 53. Like I think on FanDuel I would rather just Kyle Anderson from the Spurs side, which didn't really even talk about him. He's just a safe guy tonight. Like I think I would rather go with him over on FanDuel. On DraftKings with Ariza being like 800 cheaper, I think he's probably a better cash game option there.
I kind of like Clint Capella despite some recent struggles. He's double-doubled twice against San Antonio this year. San Antonio over the last 10 games, 26 in defensive efficiency. We've seen some centers really give them trouble. But we've also seen Capella kind of hit the pine, at times and kind of looking at what he's done. Like he's been productive, struggling a little bit at the line, but like I don't know what's up with his minutes of late.
I think a lot of it has to do with he's struggling from the line. You saw, like, especially against like the Milwaukee Bucks, they were intentionally fouling him again, and he shot 2 of 10 from the line, and that led to him playing fewer minutes. If the Spurs are in this game close to the end, and like they're trying to win because like they really need to win this game, we could see like hack a Capella, and that could really hurt his upside. Like D'Antoni could just end up benching him and they could play small. So I would take some shots in tournaments over like in cash games. I think there's definitely safer options, especially at his price. Like he's kind of the same price range as like a Marc Gasol, who is in a slightly better spot tonight.
Yeah, I'd rather go with Gasol in cash games, but like Capella's interesting in GPPs just because I'm curious to see his ownership and see if people hop back on, because I feel like he's actually been somewhat popular the last few games and like he's let a lot of people down.
Yeah, he's been in good matchups the past few games and he's really let people down against like Milwaukee and Dallas. So it probably will lead to a little bit lower ownership.
Yep. I will say on FanDuel, I think you lock in Harden. Like I just feel like it's kind of easy to build a lineup around him with all the value, and like you're kind of locking in probably one of the safest floors on the slate. But I mean, also those things could be said with Westbrook. But I kind of like, obviously going Lillard a little bit for cheaper.
Yeah, over on FanDuel, you can probably get a couple studs because there is a lot of value out there tonight. It may not be great value, but it's there. So you can probably build around 2 studs, but like you said, you're locking in, especially at a shooting guard position that's pretty darn weak tonight. You're locking in a fairly safe floor.
Yep. Anyone else in Houston?
Nah.
Moving on here, Sacramento and OKC. OKC favored by 12.5, 211 total. Sacramento, obviously, the front court still a little bit of an issue that we always have to talk about. Scal is, questionable for tonight's game. I wonder if that would obviously influence, Zach Randolph's situation tonight.
Yeah, if Scal sits, then you're gonna get like Zach Randolph playing some minutes. You'll still probably get Kosta Koufos in the starting lineup. If Scal is able to play, then that probably means one of Randolph or Koufos is gonna rest. Unfortunately, we won't know which one it's gonna be. So we just have to kind of hope that Scal is out and we get at least some indication that one of those guys might play tonight.
Yeah, because we got Willie Cauley-Stein back. He played 30 minutes against Denver, put up 29 fantasy points. I'll have some interest, especially if Adams sits for Willie Cauley-Stein here.
Yeah, I will as well. Like he would be the guy that I have the most interest in if we get news that Adams is out. Obviously, Adams questionable with a sprained ankle. If he is out again, I do really like Willie Cauley-Stein in the spots. That's going to open up a lot of rebounds, and the Thunder not really going to have anyone to protect the rim without Adams in there. So Willie Cauley-Stein would be someone that I would have a lot of interest in if Adams is out. The rest of the guys like Koufos and Zebo, I don't know if I want to go there with Koufos tonight. Like he's coming off a couple really big games. He played 38 minutes against the Magic, 20 against Denver, but he doubled against both teams. Ownership might pivot that way if we get the Adams news, and like we get the news that Scal is out. Like we might get some chalk Koufos. So cash games, obviously, you could end up rolling that. And again, in tournaments, I think I would pivot elsewhere.
Yeah, we should get that news. I mean, Slate starts at 8 o'clock. That game starts at 8, so we should have that, beforehand.
Yeah, it just matters if we're actually able to rely on it.
Yeah, that, and if I'm actually just awake an hour before lineup loading.
Yeah, daylight saving time kind of messed things up.
It really did. Like, oh man, yesterday was a drag. But yeah, I don't mind those guys. Look at the backcourt. De'Aaron Fox healthy again. Played 30 minutes against Denver. Put up 29 fantasy points. Didn't play in the prior game against OKC. Won earlier this season, 21 fantasy points in 27 minutes. I don't mind Fox here. I'm not terribly excited about him. Also just because I think the minutes are going to consistently stay around that 29-30 mark because we're going to see some Frank Mason still kind of cut into it. Outside of that, though, like I like Bogdanovich here.
Yeah, like my concern with the whole Fox Mason thing is like if one of them is the hot hand, like I know Sacramento is trying to not win games, but they're also like trying to not make it look blatantly obvious that they're trying to lose. So like if like Mason is the hot hand out there, then they could end up rolling him, and if Fox is the hot hand, then they'll roll him. So that does concern me a little bit. I don't mind taking a shot on either one. Probably Fox would be the way that I lean, just because Mason's price is ridiculously high, mostly because he's coming off two big games where Fox was out or injured. You mentioned Bogdanovich. He's struggled from 3-point range over the last 3 games. He's 3 for 18. He's not shooting too terribly well. Price is really starting to climb up there, but he does have upside in this matchup against the Thunder defense that has been really, really bad since Robertson went down. I wrote about Buddy Hield in the tournament article. He's the guy that I'm going to take a shot on tonight. He's just torched this team. Like in 3 matchups, he's averaging like 34 fantasy points against them this year. They've really struggled against shooting guards over the last 10 games. They're 27th in defensive efficiency. I think they're second in fantasy points allowed to the position. Obviously, Corey Brewer's in there in the starting lineup, and man, he's been great on defense, really. Yeah, so Buddy Hield, I think, is my tournament guy there. He's still really cheap, like 5,100 on DraftKings for a guy with 30 fantasy point upside is pretty solid.
Yeah, I like Hield here. That's about it from this King side. Like I said, not worrying about blowouts on a 4-game slate.
You kind of can't, like, especially in cash games. Like if you want to try to plan for blowouts in tournaments and you're building like 150 lineups, you can sprinkle in some of the bench guys. But like in cash games, like you just kind of have to throw the blowout risk out the window.
Yep. OKC side things, obviously we talked about Adams. He's got the questionable tag for tonight's game. I like OKC guys. I like paying for OKC guys a little bit more than I think paying for Houston guys tonight.
Yeah, I think obviously it starts with Russell Westbrook coming off another triple-double. My issue with Westbrook is, like, even though he's racking up these triple-doubles, like, he's still kind of finishing, like, in the mid-50s. Like, he hasn't had a ton of – outside of the Phoenix game, he hasn't had a ton of upside recently. Like, if you want to roll him, again, feel free. It's Russell Westbrook. Like, he has slate-breaking 100 fantasy point upside. And obviously without Steven Adams in there, that's going to open up rebounding potential for him. I mean, he's without Adams and Roberson on the floor this season. It's like almost a 40% usage rate and like 1.7 fantasy points per minute. So we know the upside is there. He's a guy that I'm probably, again, fading in tournaments because I'm going with a balanced route. But in cash, he's probably the better option out of the studs that we're going to talk about tonight.
Yeah, like on FanDuel, like you look at Westbrook, he's had 25 turnovers in 3 games against Sacramento. Has not top 50 fantasy points. He's been in the 40s. Like at 12-1, I don't want anything less than 50. Like that's pretty high, especially with Lillard for a couple thousand less. Like I said, I like the idea of fading him in GPPs. I think cash games you can obviously go that route just because there is so much value. I'm kind of just looking at Paul George, like at a small forward position. I think that's obviously pretty lean. Like he's probably my favorite guy, even though he's been kind of quiet the same. Like the peripheral stats have been a little bit down. Like we haven't seen a huge upside game out of him in a long time.
Yeah, but he's still consistently getting like the mid to upper 30s. He's been really slumping. Like the shooting hasn't been there. Like he just hasn't been scoring as much recently, and that's kind of hurt his upside. And then, of course, the steals haven't been there. But against a Kings team that is really young for the most part, obviously Randolph and Carter and some of those old guys getting minutes changes that. But
Carter has to balance that all out somehow.
Yeah, but they're still really young, so they're still going to turn the ball over. It's still a decent matchup. So I do really like him. He's probably the way that I'm going to get exposure to the OKC side of this game if Adams is in. If Adams sits, like I think you can – obviously that helps the rebounding upside of Paul George. But I think that also helps like guys like Jeremy Grant and Patrick Patterson, who are some excellent value options to consider. We saw Patterson coming against San Antonio, played 21 minutes. He's played over 20 minutes in 3 of the last 4 games. He's kind of the guy. He's a spot-up shooter. Kings struggle against spot-up shooters. He's also he's decent as far as posting up goes, so he's another option that you can consider there. Like I think he probably ends up starting if Adams is out in this game.
Yeah, definitely like both those options. Like obviously we like attacking Sacramento. It's what, March 12th. We've said that plenty of times already this season. Go back to the well with that. Like I like those value plays quite a bit, especially if they're not going to be that popular. Corey Brewer has put up over 20 fantasy points in back-to-back games. You have any interest here? Like he's so cheap. Like he's 3,800 on FanDuel at small forward.
I mean, he's cheap. I don't see a ton of upside. Like if like in cash games, you're happy with him getting, like 20, 21, 22 fantasy points. But like in tournaments, like you're probably looking for a little bit more. And if none of this other value opens up like Patterson and Grant, like you're looking at a guy that's probably going to be pretty popular. And I'm going to at some point, like he's going to stop shooting like freaking 50% from three. Like we're talking about a career 28% 3-point shooter. Like he's not going to continue to knock down 50% of his 3-pointers. And when that happens, like the bottom's going to fall out of his floor tonight, out of his floor. So like, I don't know. It could happen tonight.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't do obviously too much else. Like he'll notch a few rebounds, maybe get a steal or two, but like that's about it. Like you said, like you are kind of expecting like 20, 25 fantasy points is kind of a reasonable range of outcomes as far as like a ceiling goes. I don't expect anything more. But then kind of looking at the rest of the field in that price range, like DraftKings, it's a different story because you have so much crossover position eligibility. Like you have Buddy Hield, who's small forward eligible. You have Richardson, you have Kyle Anderson, you have all these guys. Like, it's a little bit different there.
Yeah, like I don't know if I'm playing on FanDuel as small forward, I think I'm going to find the extra 600 and get Rudy Gay. Like $600 is not that hard to come by. Like you can get Rudy Gay for 600 more, and you're talking about a guy that actually does more than just hit 50% of his 3-pointers.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Carmelo Anthony, any interest here? Like he's a guy I've just kind of stopped trying, and I think he may have stopped trying as well.
Man, it's tough. Like he's a guy that I still think at some point he's going to have a game, a pretty solid game, and his price down to 5,900 over on DraftKings. What is he?
58 on FanDuel.
Like that's cheap. Like he's cheaper than Zach Randolph and Scout Labissiere. Like, and again, if Adams is out, that opens up double-digit rebounds for somebody on one of these teams to pull down, and like Melo playing close to the basket, like it could happen for him. So I would probably sprinkle in some tournament exposure if Adams is out.
Yeah, like he's cheap. That's kind of like the only positive he's got going. Like he's played pretty well against Sacramento. He hasn't shot entirely well, but the production's been at least decent. And you take 30 fantasy points at that price. Like you said, if Adams is out, I like him a little bit more just because that position is fairly weak tonight. So sure, why not?
Exactly.
So, anyone else on the Thunder side?
Nah.
Milwaukee and Memphis, 205 total. It's unreal that Milwaukee just gets to play like a G League team tonight. It's not fair to the other teams.
Yeah, well, Milwaukee kind of needs it because they were struggling for a little while, but now they're on a stretch where they're playing like 4 G League teams in a row. So they kind of needed it, and this is a spot where like Memphis. I don't like to predict blowouts, but I'm feeling pretty comfortable that Memphis is going to get blown out tonight. Like they just got routed by the Dallas Mavericks. So like times are tough when you're getting routed by the Dallas Mavericks.
Yeah, that's just bad. That's when you just call it in the season, like you wave the white flag.
I feel so bad for Marc Gasol.
Oh, you can physically see on his face how much he hates playing right now.
Yeah, it's bad.
On this Milwaukee side, though, I mean, do you have any interest in like their big names? Like, we talked about obviously Harden and Westbrook, but I mean, Giannis is obviously on the slate as well. Still like he's another guy like they haven't limited their minutes, and he's been a guy who's been talking about that, like as you've mentioned previously on the show a few times. Expensive, but I think he's an interesting pivot away from Westbrook and Harden.
He is. I mean, he's 10-8 over on DraftKings. That's definitely an interesting price point to attack. And again, we like targeting Giannis and against teams that struggle to protect the rim. Memphis rim protection has really gone down the crapper recently, mostly because their team has gone down the crapper. So yeah, I mean, again, if you want to roll them out, like you can't really make an argument against any of these studs. Like they're not in the greatest matchups against, you're talking teams that play really, really slow, sometimes decent or at least most of the time decent defense. So, like you're not like terribly excited about any of these studs, but if you want to get exposure to him, he's probably going to be a lower owned of the three.
Yeah, I would think so. And like you kind of look like, we still have positions we can kind of battle. And like you said, the DraftKings price tag is still pretty intriguing, like 10-8. Nice discount for a guy with with double upside here. Obviously Memphis is just a horrendous rebounding team now. Yeah, I don't mind getting some exposure, especially on DK at 10-8. Like that's a pretty intriguing price tag. I think Bledsoe might be my favorite option if I'm going with anyone from Milwaukee, just from a price point standpoint. Like it's just Memphis has been god awful against point guards. Like looking at the guys who are going to try and guard him, like Bledsoe should be able to rack up like 40 fantasy points, and even if he plays like 28 minutes.
You would think so, but I mean, obviously Bledsoe hasn't been able to do it in some really good matchups before, but we'll see. Like I think against the Memphis team, you mentioned god awful against point guards are 29th in defensive efficiency over the last 10 games. And they've been turning the ball over a ton. Like I think they're third in turnovers per game over the last 10. So you would expect him to be able to come out and put up a solid game here and rack up some steals. Like he basically just needs the shot to fall. Like, I mean, his scoring has been down over the last 2 games. He shot 36% against Houston, shot, below 50% over like the last 4 games, but prior to that. So, and assuming that shot falls, like he could get in the double digits as far as scoring goes, and then obviously he has some rebound assist upside. So, I do like him in this spot, especially on DraftKings at 6,100. FanDuel might be a different story because his price is starting to climb up there. It's like 7,700, but he's definitely at a discount over on DraftKings.
Yeah, I mean, I don't find that he's been in that great of matchups over the last. Like the Knicks, obviously, I thought he would thrive in a little bit more, but I mean, Houston, Indiana twice, Philly, like, Indiana and Philly have both been top 10 defensive efficiency against point guards of late. Like Detroit, he was decent in, obviously it was a blowout, but I don't know. Like I feel like he's been fine over on FanDuel because he has that steal potential. Like he's been over 40 fantasy points in 3 of the last 2 games. So 7,500 on FanDuel, like I don't feel that bad about paying the price.
Yeah, you can definitely go there.
Middleton, any interest here?
As a guy that's going to get minutes, sure. Outside of that, like I know he's coming off a decent game against the Knicks. He had a decent game against Houston. Really struggled in a couple games before that, and like I said, he's, as a minutes guy, sure. Outside of that, I'm not terribly intrigued by him.
Any interest in like anyone else in the front court here? Like, are you looking at like Jabari Parker?
Parker is a little bit interesting. Memphis has really struggled against power forwards recently. They're 26th in defensive efficiency over the last 10. They're giving up like almost 25 points per game and like 11 rebounds per game. He's going to play limited minutes, but like at that price tag, like you don't need a huge game out of him. Like, I mean, he's 4,700 on DraftKings. He's 40, if he's 53 over on FanDuel, like I think 30 fantasy points is a realistic expectation out of him in this spot. So he would be a guy that I would get some exposure to.
Yeah, I don't mind it. Outside of that, though, it's pretty much it on the Milwaukee side.
Yeah.
Memphis, we get Marcus Gasol back. Obviously, Chalmers, Evans, Harrison listed as out so far. Jarrell Martin questionable for tonight's game. This has been a Memphis team that's just been god awful. Like their implied total is 99. I think that's like 20 points too generous.
It very well might be. Like I didn't actually go back and look, but I would be shocked if they scored over like 100 points in more than like 2 or 3 of their last like 20 games. I think the Bulls game was one that they actually did score over 100 points, but that's the Bulls. Yeah, this game is like the Memphis side, like it's pretty risky with some of these guys. Like I think Gasol is probably a safe option, especially like on DraftKings at 7,500. FanDuel, he is 7,800. Like he feels like the safest cash game center of the bunch, and he's in a good matchup. But like I'm not expecting more than like 38, 40 fantasy points out of him tonight.
No, like I don't think this is obviously a ceiling game for Gasol. I think the ceiling game is kind of like gone for the rest of the year because I just don't see him going out and surpassing like a huge outing. But like you said, I think 40 fantasy points is solid. Saw that against Utah. Obviously, it's a decent spot against Milwaukee. I know they've obviously been better defensively, but still like the target centers against them. Price is down, like he's not like 8K like he was the other night. So I don't mind kind of going back to Gasol here. Uh, JaMychal Green, a little bit intriguing, like on FanDuel at least, where you need two power forwards. I could see using him at 6,200, but I'm not thrilled about it.
Yeah, I'm not really either. Like, you should see him getting back to, the double-digit rebounds that we saw a few games ago against this Milwaukee team. But like on DraftKings, he's 7,100. You mentioned FanDuel, where he's a better option, where you have to play two power forwards. He's 62. I'd much rather play him over there. You're just not really getting a discount on him, and like you need the double-digit rebounds and double-digit points out of him to really pay off that salary. So it's not terribly appealing, but neither is the power forward position over on FanDuel. So I don't mind it over there. The rest of this team, like Dylan Brooks made it into my GPP article today. Like it's not appealing, but like we're talking about a guy with like a 30% usage rate without Tyreek and without Harrison and Mario Chalmers on the floor. He's averaging like 0.82 fantasy points per minute. I mean, he's still cheap enough where like if he comes out and gets you 28, 30 fantasy points, you'll take it. And like Milwaukee has struggled against small forwards over the last 10 games. They're 26th in defensive efficiency. We've seen decent production out of Brooks recently. And against the same Bucks team, I mean, 27 minutes last time they played, 27 fantasy points, like at 4,900 over on FanDuel or over on DraftKings and 52. Like I'll take that all day long.
Yeah, I mean, for a guy who's averaging 16 shot attempts over the last 5 games, like I'll go to Brooks there. Ben McLemore, I mean, playing 34 minutes over his last 5 games, been pretty solid. Like, obviously struggled against kind of Utah as expected. I don't mind at his price. Like he's 5K on FanDuel. Like we talked about how bad shooting guard spot is. Gonna have to eat up minutes just because they are so limited.
Yeah.
It's like oh man, I don't think I've ever talked about Ben McLemore on a pod ever as a play. Like this might be the first time in history because we obviously haven't had pods the last few days, but it might be the first time in history.
Yeah, like when you're relying on McLemore being a solid option, like it's bad. But like I mean, you mentioned he's going to eat up a ton of minutes. Like the field goal attempts are going to be there for him. Like he's gonna chuck it tonight. Like there's not a whole lot of other places to go. So like I feel like McLemore is probably the better option out of like the Kobe Simmons McLemore guys. Like the Kobe Simmons game, like people are still hoping that it happens, and it outside of like the San Antonio where he was like 26 fantasy points, like I just don't see it happening.
No, I don't either. And I'll continue. Like McLemore is only $1,000 more on Simmons on FanDuel. Like you look on DraftKings, I mean, McLemore is only 5'3". Like it's not a bad price tag. If we're talking another $1,000, then maybe you can make a case for like using Simmons for cheaper, but it's still McLemore.
Yeah, for sure.
Is that it? Do you have any interest in anyone else that's viable on the roster?
Do they actually have anyone else that's viable on their roster?
No, they don't. Like, oh, Parsons is going to come in and help out. He's going to play 15 minutes.
Yeah, he's going to have a game one of these times. Like I'm kind of like at some point he's going to have a big game. I don't think it's going to happen tonight though.
No, I don't either. Let's move on. Last game of the night, Miami and Portland, 209 total. Portland favored by 7. Miami obviously going to be out without some guys. Hassan Whiteside ruled out. Dwayne Wade ruled out. Looking at the side here, like Portland's been pretty damn good defensively of late. I'm not terribly intrigued with Miami's side. Like Dragic pisses me off so much, man. Like he pisses me off.
Yeah, it's getting tough to trust him because like when you put him in good spots, like he comes out and he just duds and gets in foul trouble. I don't know. I'm probably gonna throw out that last Washington game from the sample size because like I got in foul trouble just watching the game, like thousands of miles away. Like I was getting whistles against me because like the refs were just really bad in that game. But like without Wade and without Whiteside, obviously we know they're still without Dion Waiters and they have a bunch of other injuries. Like Dragic's 30% usage rate and 1.1 fantasy points per minute is kind of tough to overlook in tournaments, especially at his price. Like on DraftKings, he's 6,300. I know he's like what 65 over on FanDuel. I would probably get some tournament exposure, even though Portland has been like first in defensive efficiency over the last 10 games against point guards, but that's still a solid usage rate, and I would probably get some tournament exposure there.
Yeah, I will too. Like, I just like he was in a similar situation against Portland last time out. You know, I know Waiters played, but he only played 17 minutes of that game. But Whiteside was out. There was obviously no Wade. 28% usage rate. Over 30 minutes and put up 21 fantasy points. That's just when you think Dragic, like you obviously think like, oh, he's always a stable 30 fantasy point guy, but man, I can't get him right. I can't.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with him recently, but like I said, you're looking at him in tournaments, cash games. Yeah, that's gonna be no.
Yeah, I mean, with Wade out, obviously there's going to be a little bit more stable minutes. Like I kind of expect Tyler Johnson to get some stable run here. We're going to see some Wayne Ellington. Do you have any interest in those guys kind of filling in?
Tyler Johnson's at least a little bit interesting. Like he's a guy that has shown upside, like especially against Washington, but he's also shown like no floor, like we saw against Phoenix and Philly. So like double digit shot attempts over in 3 straight games. Again, I think the entire Miami side of this game is going to be guys that you can target in tournaments, not anyone that you're really looking at in cash games here.
No, because like when you look to like Portland's been very solid against shooting guards as well, like over the last 10 games. When you kind of look at they struggle a little bit more against forwards. Like Portland 21st in defensive efficiency against small forwards the last 10 games. I know Richardson's kind of slipped off, but like obviously, blowout against Washington hurt him. He only played 21 minutes, but still put up 25 fantasy points. He might be the guy that I take a look at in terms and kind of hope for maybe an upside game. It's been a little bit. Obviously, we saw it against Detroit, but outside of that, he's been kind of just hovering around that 25 fantasy point mark. Prices come down on Richardson to where maybe I'll take a shot on him.
He would be the closest thing to a cash option that I would look at from the Miami side of this game, and it comes at just like the price. I mean, 5,300 over on DraftKings is really cheap, and he's been shooting the ball pretty well recently. So there is some scoring upside here. I know he hasn't been playing a lot of minutes, but obviously with Wade out, we could see that kind of change. So he would be the closest thing to a cash option I would look at, and obviously he does have some tournament upside. The rest of the guys, though, like Kelly Olynyk, James Johnson, both guys that I think you want to get some tournament exposure to. Olynyk, 1.06 fantasy points per minute, like 26% usage rate with Whiteside and Wade off the floor. So he would be a guy that I would have a lot of interest in. And we saw James Johnson come out and put up a big game in limited minutes. He's still really cheap over on DraftKings. FanDuel, they jacked him up to 4,600, but I think he's a guy that you can look at as well. And then Bam Adebayo, foul trouble last game, but I would definitely go back to the well with Adebayo here, especially at his price, 3,800.
Yeah, I don't mind him. I kind of miss chalk James Johnson. Just safe option to plug and play when we got these injuries. But I mean, nearly triple-double last time against Portland. I like taking some shots on some of these power forward options. I will say, I'm sure people are going to be like, what about Justice Winslow? I liked his price, like, when he was in the 4Ks. I don't like paying really 5K for him. But I will say, like, you can use him if you want. Like, I'm just not a fan of the price.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the price. He has been playing really well recently, so that is interesting. And they've been using him as kind of like a point guard at times. So he would be the second like cash viable guy that I would consider in this spot. I'm still not looking at him in tournaments though.
Nah. Portland, obviously, we're going to start here with Damian Lillard, who just continues to crush. We've talked about Miami struggling against point guards of late. I'm going to go back to the well. Like, I know Lillard struggled in their earlier meeting, but I'm going back to Lillard here.
Yeah, like I don't really know what else you have to say about this dude. Like he's literally he's carrying this team to wins. I mean, he's got over 30 real points in like see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the last 10 games. He's been over 40 fantasy or 45 fantasy points in like all but one of the last 10 games. Still 9,300 over on DraftKings. He's still cheap over on FanDuel at 9,500. Usage rate is insane. Been shooting a ton of 3-pointers recently, and against a Miami team that is allowing opposing point guards to shoot 48.4% from three over the last 10 games. Like I'm all in on Damian Lillard in this spot.
Yeah. And without Whiteside, like, we saw Miami really struggle against opposing centers and struggle on the glass without Whiteside earlier this season. You have interest in like a Nurkic or Ed Davis here?
Nurkic in tournaments because he's cheap. I think I'd still rather go with like Ed Davis and Al-Farouq Aminu. And as far as like cashier options, like Aminu hasn't been playing a bunch of minutes recently, but this is a spot against a Miami team that has struggled against opposing front courts recently. So I think he's a little bit interesting. Zach Collins playing a few extra minutes recently doesn't have a ton of upside. Like you're probably just getting like 20, 23 fantasy points out of him, but like at 3,600 in cash games, I think that's a viable option as well.
Yeah. And like he's been the reason why Nurkic is just tournament viable of late. Like, because Nurkic has been fine fantasy points per minute wise. Like, he's nearly 3 double-doubles in a row, but it's just the minutes, and it's because Zach Collins is like sneaking into games and playing 20 minutes.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, like Zach Collins and Ed Davis are just playing decent minutes, so like they're giving some of those guys a run because Nurkic probably not going to be in a Portland uniform next season.
No, and it's not because like Nurkic hasn't been great obviously this year as a whole, but like hasn't been bad lately. It's just like you said, like they are kind of working in some other names, and I can't blame them. Like usually I'm upset when guys don't get minutes that I like, but I can't be upset here.
Yeah, there's really nothing to be upset at. So like, yeah, it's one of those things where I think the cheaper guys are your better options, and Nurkic can be rolled out in tournaments.
Yeah. CJ McCollum, if you're going the balance route, I don't hate. He's only 7,300 on FanDuel. Like once again, like the minutes are going to be there. He's been shooting the ball pretty well of late. You can use him. Like he's cash and GPP viable.
Yeah, he's another guy against, like I mentioned, Miami really struggling to defend 3-point line recently, and he's 7, 9, 3, 8 3-point attempts over the last 4 games, scoring pretty well. So basically, like just the backcourt of Portland is doing the majority of the scoring for Portland. So those two are the ones that I have the most interest in.
Yep. 4-game slate. We probably made this much longer than that to be, but here we are. We get to wrap it up and go enjoy our day. What do you want to do tonight?
Drink.
Yeah, that's true. I don't even care enough about this slate to come up with like a final thing. You want to do like best points per dollar value, since we've talked about like 40%, not even 40%, like 60% of the slate has been guys under like 5K.
Yeah, let's go with Buddy G Buckets.
Oh, I like it.
The G stands for gets.
I like it. I'm gonna go Adebayo here. Stays out of foul trouble.
Bam.
Yeah, he's under 4K. So I like that. I don't know. Are you an Office fan?
I've only watched like 2. People are probably just gonna like never listen to me again, but I've only watched like 2 episodes. I just couldn't get into it that much.
We're gonna end the pod then. That's gonna wrap it up for us. You can download DaveFantasyCafe.com. We'll be back tomorrow with a bigger and better, more enticing slate.
Good luck.